Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Crossing to the House of Commons now, listening to the Housing Minister, Alok Sharma, who's making a further statement about Grenfell Tower.
And ensure that other buildings around the country are safe. But throughout, our first priority has been helping victims who have suffered such an unspeakable trauma. We've been working hard to ensure that they have all the support they need, securing emergency accommodation and making financial and emotional support available as quickly as possible. The response efforts have been coordinated by the Grenfell response team led by John Bardell. He is being supported by colleagues drawn from London councils, the wider local government sector, the voluntary sector, police, health and fire service, as well as central government. And I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to them for all their immense efforts over the last few weeks. The new leader of the Royal Borough of Kensington Chelsea, Elizabeth Campbell, has given a fulsome apology for the inadequate initial response. She has also asked for help from central government to put things right. As the Community Secretary has set out in a written statement today, we will be establishing an independent task force to help the Royal Borough of Kensington Chelsea build their capability so they can deal with the longer-term challenge of recovery. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister promised that we would make an offer of temporary housing to all those who have lost their homes as a result of the fire within 3 weeks. These are good quality, fully furnished homes so that families can move on from emergency accommodation and live rent-free in a proper home whilst permanent accommodation on equal terms is found. 158 families from Grenfell Tower and Grenfell Walk have been identified in need of such housing. I can confirm that every family that is ready to talk to the housing team has been offered a temporary home. 139 have received offers of accommodation. 19 families have not yet been ready to engage in this process. We need to respect that. Some are still in hospital as a result of their injuries. In some cases, the people on the ground offering these families support have been clear that it would be inappropriate at this time to ask them to make a decision about where they will live. These families, Mr. Speaker, have been through unimaginable trauma. And we need to go at the pace that they want to go. What matters above all else is what the families individually want. The Grenfell response team has been working with 139 families currently engaged with the process to match them with appropriate temporary accommodation and to start to talk to them about their long-term needs. The housing team have identified and secured over 200 good quality properties so that residents can have a choice where to live. I know that some have raised concerns about the quality of the accommodation offered. All the properties have been inspected by the housing team to ensure they are in a good condition. My right honourable friend, the Community Secretary, personally has seen an example of the kind of property on offer. Representatives of local residents groups have also seen and been assured of the quality. And if the Shadow Minister would find it helpful, I would be very happy to visit some of these properties with him so he can assure himself of their quality. All of the properties are local, either in Kensington Chelsea or a neighbouring borough. This will mean that families can continue to be near their friends and relatives, go to the same GP and send their children to the same school. 14 offers of temporary accommodation have been accepted and 3 families have already moved in, and I expect this number to increase, but we have to respect the pace at which the families want to move. I have personally, Mr. Speaker, met over 30 of the families who have been directly affected. And from talking to them, I understand that there are many reasons why they are reluctant to take up these offers. Some might choose to remain in hotels until they have an offer of a permanent tenancy. We also understand one of the big issues holding people back is the lack of trust. Some families were told that they were moving into Grenfell Tower on a temporary basis, and then, years later, they were still there. Their concerns are entirely understandable. That is trust that we need to work hard to earn. We also have to respect their decision if they do not wish to move out of temporary accommodation before permanent housing is available. We will keep on making offers to families of local homes we think would be suitable for them. But no one, Mr. Speaker, will be forced into a home that they do not want to move to. And I want to respond directly to a number of reports which have been made claiming people are being told to move far from London, or that they may be deemed homeless if they do not accept an offer. I want to be absolutely clear to the House. If this is ever suggested to a victim, then it is completely unacceptable. I have already stated that if anyone is aware of an individual family which is not receiving the offer we have promised, please tell me. We will fix this. And I repeat that call to the House now. So let me set out again what the government is ready to talk, has been offered temporary accommodation. The housing team will continue to work with families to ensure that their individual needs are met. And as my right honourable friend the Prime Minister said, everyone whose home was destroyed by the fire will be guaranteed a new home on the same terms as the one they lost. And this means paying the same rent, with the same level of security and in the same area. And when it comes to permanent housing, we have already announced a new block of social housing that will provide 68 new homes in Kensington Row. We are urgently working with a number of developers to secure similar properties, either in Kensington and Chelsea or very close to North Kensington, so families can stay in the same area. Mr. Speaker, these negotiations have not yet concluded, and we need to work closely with the residents to make sure that the sort of properties we are able to make available will match what they want. There are also 17 leaseholders who lost their homes, and we are working with them to make sure they do not lose out financially because of the fire. I met recently with a group of the leaseholders, and we are working with them individually to find the right solution for them. Mr. Speaker, on my visit to the Westway, hearing the harrowing accounts of survivors has been the most humbling and moving experience of my life. The families that I've met have been through unimaginable pain. This is a tragedy that should never have happened. And we are determined to do all that we can to make sure something like this never happens again.
Sir John Healey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the Minister to this dispatch box for his first oral statement in this job, and thank him for the copy of his statement. Can I also add the thanks from our side to John Barradell and the emergency response team, as well as to the community organisations that are still supporting the survivors. The Minister has had a testing first few weeks. I hope he knows now that whatever he says, it's the government's actions that count in getting Grenfell Tower residents the help and new housing they need, and in giving them and the wider local community in North Kensington the confidence that what's promised will be done. And I have to say to him, the government's been slow to act. It's been off the pace at each stage following this terrible tragedy, and it's clear from this statement that in some ways it still is. After the fire, in this House, the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "I have fixed a deadline of 3 weeks for everybody affected to be found a home nearby." The 3 weeks are up, yet whole families who've lost everything are still in hotels and hostels. And we learned today that just three of the 158 families from Grenfell Tower have moved into a fresh home. And these are only temporary, not what the Prime Minister first said. Plus, only 11 others have so far been found somewhere that they feel they can say yes to. So why have so few families been successfully matched with fresh accommodation? And is it the case, as I've been told, that some have been offered accommodation with too few bedrooms, or in another tower block, or indeed with bizarre conditions attached, including no overnight stay for family or friends. A hotel room is no home, and temporary housing is no place to rebuild shattered lives. So when will all those now homeless from the fire be offered a new permanent home? The Minister mentioned the 68 homes in Kensington Row in that development. They were already allocated for social housing. So how many extra social homes has the government or the council made available in the borough? Will the government guarantee that the number of new social homes planned before the fire will be increased by at least the number needed now as a result of the fire? And what assessment has the government made with the Mayor of London and the other London boroughs of the knock-on consequences for temporary accommodation, social housing and council waiting lists across the city? Now, the Minister mentioned the Recovery Task Force for Kensington and Chelsea. So this is the task force sent in now to take over from the task force sent in 3 weeks ago. Kensington and Chelsea is a failing council. It's even failed to admit it's failing. And the fundamental concern about this council is not just capability, it's the total lack of trust that residents or anyone else has in it. And the government concedes this by sending in the task force, yet leaves the council in charge. We on this side, Mr. Speaker, want the task force to work, but doubt that it will. It can advise, but it cannot act. It lacks the powers of decision or action that commissioners would bring. And public confidence in this council will just not be restored by replacing one set of leaders by politicians from the same ruling group. So what will be the tests for this task force, and what will be the tests of further council failings before ministers take the fuller intervention steps needed as they have in other areas? And finally, Mr. Speaker, the fears following the fire go well beyond Grenfell Tower, as do the consequences. Hundreds of thousands of people whose homes are in high-rise blocks across the rest of the country want to know their homes are safe. And this means the full building has been tested for fire safety, not just one component of the cladding outside. All replacement cladding and fire prevention works necessary to guarantee safety are done, and that no remedial action is delayed or not done because the council or housing association hasn't got the funding. So how much funding has the government set aside for these costs? Has the Treasury agreed access to the contingency fund? And will he today, to give this reassurance to Tower Block residents, make the clear commitment to full upfront funding for whatever work is needed to make these high-rise homes safe? When ministers have rightly said you can't put a price on people's lives, this is what it means.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the right honourable gentleman for his comments. Perhaps I can take in turn the points that he's raised. First, in terms of actions, I think we've been very clear, the Prime Minister has made clear that the initial response wasn't good enough, and she said that at the dispatch box. My ministerial colleagues and I have been engaged in meetings with the community, as he knows, both on an individual basis but also in terms of community meetings, and that work will continue. The 3-week offer that the right honourable gentleman refers to was to make sure that we offered people who were able to, wanted to, the temporary accommodation. He's talked about the numbers. As I've said, we are working with all the families that are involved, and I would expect that number to rise. But I know that he will acknowledge, and I know everyone in this House will acknowledge, that it is not up to government or indeed any member in this House to determine the pace at which families should move. That has to be up to them, and we have to treat them with sensitivity, and that's what we are very much doing. He talked about whether people are being housed in tower blocks. That is not the case. And I know there was initially some reporting about tower blocks. I believe that was in relation to emergency accommodation in hotels, which are tower blocks, but we responded to that. He has talked about the affordable housing. Can I just confirm, Mr. Speaker, that Kensington Row was not originally designated as social housing, it was affordable housing. So this is a net increase. And what we're looking to do is to provide a net increase in the number of homes in the social sector. He made reference to the task force, the Independent Recovery Task Force that has now been appointed. This will report directly to my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, and members, including the chair, are being identified, and we should be in a position to announce further details over the coming weeks. And I just want to be very clear about this, that the special focus of this Recovery Task Force is going to be on housing, regeneration and community engagement. Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman talked about high-rise blocks, and I do understand that those living in similar blocks across the country will have concerns, but that is why we acted immediately. We made sure that we informed local authorities and housing associations the checks they needed to do. We put in place a regime for them to send us the cladding materials on any building that they felt was suspect, and that testing has been going on at pace. And we have been very clear that local authorities and housing associations should do whatever is necessary to keep people safe. And if there are issues to do with funding, we will work with individual local authorities and housing associations. But it is absolutely vital that we make sure that everyone who lives in such a block is kept safe. He will also know that he talked about sort of wider tests. When we wrote to local authorities and housing associations on the 22nd of June, we also asked them to look at issues related to insulation and to check that. And of course, my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, has appointed on the 27th of June an expert panel to advise on these matters. And the expert panel met on Thursday, the 29th of June, and agreed a range of matters that it will look at, but particularly to consider whether there are any immediate additional action should be taken to ensure the safety of existing high-rise buildings. Mr. Speaker, I know this is a subject that I wish we weren't here having to debate. But what I would say, and I think I've found this actually in the discussions that I've had with colleagues from around the House, this is a time for us to be working together. There is a public inquiry, there is a criminal investigation underway. They will apportion blame and they will leave no stone unturned. But this is the time for us to work together. So I say again to colleagues, including the right honourable gentleman, if there are any individuals that any of us feels is not getting the right level of support, please come to me, stand ready to assist and help.
Mark Pawsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's very clear that the Minister fully understands the very great challenges that the residents face, and anyone who has had dealings with their local authority housing department will recognise the difficulties of quickly finding accommodation, particularly in an area of high
We're just going to break away from the Commons there. That was a statement by the Housing Minister, Alok Sharma, who broke down in tears at the end of his statement, saying that his experience in the last few days in the Westway has been the most humbling in his life. The families have been through unimaginable pain. We must make sure it never happens again. Also confirming the offer that's been made to those who have been affected by the Grenfell Tower fire, saying that all 139 families have been offered homes, 19 have chosen not to engage, some still in hospital, he said. Of those, 14 have accepted offers of accommodation, 11 are still waiting, 3 families have now moved in. Let's bring in our reporter, Sarah Hadjibagheri, who's down there in North Kensington. It was a moving end to his speech. Sarah, how do you think it will be? How do you think people there will respond to what they've just seen?
Well, I think there's still a huge amount of mistrust in this community. We are now 3 weeks on since this disaster happened on the 14th of June. The government had set a deadline of today to be able to rehouse people, and yet we understand that although 139 offers were made of temporary accommodation, only 14 of those have been taken up by households. Many of the people here feeling that they have not been offered appropriate accommodation. So many questions still left unanswered for them. Yes, we know there's going to be a public inquiry. Yes, they've said today that there's going to be a public consultation about the remit of that inquiry. But this community in North Kensington feels, and has felt for some time, that the authorities have not listened to them in the past. They've been very unhappy about the response the authorities have given to them. We hear that there's now going to be a task force. Central government is going to step in after heavy criticism of Kensington and Chelsea Council. Both the leader and the chief executive have resigned in the past couple of weeks over their handling of the Grenfell disaster. But of course, we also heard today from the Metropolitan Police about that search and rescue operation. This is one of the biggest search and rescue operations the Met Police has ever handled, and yet after 3 weeks on they have still only been able to identify 21 people, formerly with a coroner. So many people still waiting to hear news about their loved ones, to be able to get remains so that they might be able to give them a funeral. We understand that the Metropolitan Police have made 87 recoveries, but they caveated that number by saying that because of the catastrophic damage in the tower, that doesn't necessarily equate to 87 people. And they've also said that this search and rescue operation could continue until next year because of the state of the disaster and the scenes that we see inside the tower. 15.5 tons of debris on every single floor, and possibly most tragically of all, they've actually not been able to have any contact with people from 23 of the flats. So they can't at this stage definitively say how many people were in those 23 flats that night, and so there's still so much mistrust here in North Kensington about the death toll.
OK, Sarah, thanks very much.
Well, let's bring you much more now on the recovery operation at Grenfell Tower. Many former residents are still living in hotels 3 weeks after the fire. The government had promised to find them suitable accommodation by today, but so far just 14 families have accepted what's on offer. Sky's Joe Tidy has been to meet 2 families who've been living in hotels since their rooms were destroyed.
Before Grenfell Tower fell silent, it was full of music and laughter. This is the Alves family. They brought their 13th floor apartment from the council 16 years ago. Now they live here. Mum and Dad in separate hotel rooms from their children.
It was difficult to see the flat in flames, but the worst thing it was not that, is to see the people waiting for us, and we cannot do anything for them.
Waiting for help.
They say they've been offered a home, but not allowed to view it.
I had the offer, but I didn't have the opportunity to see. They said it's not ready yet, and I'm waiting for it.
So all you've had is an address, basically?
Exactly, yes.
Which I imagine is not good enough to make a decision on. How do you feel about that?
I mean, you know, I know that things take time. I'm not, you know, try to be rush on them, because there's no, the thing they had to take time. But first of all, stability for us is the most important thing.
Elsewhere in Grenfell Tower, Ilea Moses' family made many happy memories on the 4th floor. We met her hours after she lost her home.
My neighbour from number 16, knocking frantically, saying that there's a fire. With that, I went into my house, got my dressing gown, my slippers and my keys, and I left my house.
We then visited her 3 days after the fire, when she was coming to terms with life in the hotel.
I need to sleep, but I'm now afraid. I'm afraid to go to sleep, because if I sleep and something happens, I might not know about it.
And today, 3 weeks on, she's sleeping and recovering mentally, but not much other progress has been made.
Today is my first normal feeling day. I feel a little bit more of myself.
What's the situation with accommodation? What have you been told?
Well, we were told by as you know, on the media, that Theresa May would have us all housed by today. I'm still in the hotel, and nobody has come to me with a direct offer. I haven't viewed anywhere, and that's all I can say at the moment. She has failed drastically.
Despite the promises then, 3 weeks on, and getting things back to how they were are still a distant dream. Joe Tidy, Sky News.
Well, we can now speak to the leading human rights barrister, Michael Mansfield QC, helping the families who've been impacted by the fire with the legalities they're facing. Also by his partner, Yvette Greenway, who is co-founder of the Silence of Suicide charity, is involved in looking after their emotional and mental welfare. Many thanks to both of you for joining us on Sky News this afternoon. Yvette Greenway, to you first. The process of rehousing the residents of Grenfell has proved problematic, to say the least. Having worked closely with some of those who were in the tower that night, how have they been affected by this?
Well, you can only imagine the size of the trauma. I mean, it's absolutely huge. And the thing to remember here, it's not going to be a short-term thing. You know, we're looking for processes and protocols to be put in place that deliver the standard of care that these people need for many years to come. We're talking 10, 15 years, probably a minimum. Trauma has a massive impact on people's lives. And, you know, we keep hearing people saying that they're going to make sure that people have good quality accommodation. Well, good quality, who is that defining that? How is that defined? Because actually what we really want is suitable accommodation that meets the needs of individuals and families that have been traumatised by the Grenfell fire.
I mean, how important is identifying the correct accommodation for their next step in the process of dealing with what happened that night? We've been hearing stories today that one family were offered a place in another tower block, which would seem incredibly inappropriate given what happened at Grenfell.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's nothing short of insensitive, is it? How anyone has got the nerve to suggest that to people that have been trapped in a burning tower and watch their families suffer while they can do nothing, and they think that is suitable housing. It's an absolute disgrace, to be quite honest. No, what people need is they need consistency, they need stability, okay, and they need the right kind of ongoing support. So when we're looking to house these people, they've already been, they're displaced already. They don't want to be going through that again. Moving them into temporary accommodation does not fix things. In fact, it impacts upon their mental well-being, which is bad enough as it is. So, you know, they need some stability. We need permanent housing for these people now. That is vital, so they can at least begin to try and feel they've got a home, they've got a secure place, not a high-rise block, that they can start to get their lives back together just a little bit, a day at a time.
Let's turn to the legalities of the situation for a second and bring in your partner, Michael Mansfield. Mr Mansfield, no one would doubt that the state, that the local authority and the government have a huge moral obligation to make sure that the residents of Grenfell are placed in suitable accommodation. But in terms of their legal duty of care, how are they performing?
Well, I think what is astonishing and needs to be covered by the inquiry, which is already being questioned in terms of reference, is housing policy, safety policy and contingency plans at a national and local level. Because the idea, the concept of a conflagration of this kind is not unforeseen and unpredictable. And if that is a possibility, the local authority and the national have to have a contingency plans to deal with evacuation, to deal with alternative housing, to deal with the provision of support, food, clothing, all the obvious things, as well as mental welfare. Now, it seems to me either there wasn't a plan, or if there was, there certainly wasn't put into operation, and still really hasn't been put into operation. So I think that's the big question, is whether any local authority has already got a plan of action that can be put into force straight away. So far, that doesn't appear to be the case.
Certainly a number of the former residents of Grenfell and people from the community are already asking those questions, which kind of leads us on to the scope of the inquiry. I mean, how involved should the victims of an incident such as the disaster at Grenfell Tower, how involved should they be in setting the parameters? There does come a point where an inquiry can be too broad, isn't there?
Well, I think probably it can never be too broad. You have to remember in this case, it is a particular a particular environment and a particular happening which it touches not just the community around Grenfell Tower. And one has to say, have they got plans in case they need to evacuate the tower altogether? I don't suppose there's anybody living in it anymore, or the surrounding blocks, because there's a risk of that block. Have they thought about this? Have they got plans for that? So it seems to me the community have a lot of contributions to make. And unlike, let us say, a specific inquiry into an accident on the road or the failure of a particular machine or whatever, yeah, that's one kind of inquiry. This is much bigger than how did the fire start. And the mistake has been that first Theresa May says it's got to be very broad. She said that. Then the judge comes along and says, oh, no, it's only going to be narrow. Now today, the Minister of Justice says, oh, no, it's going to be wide. Now, from my point of view, and anyone who's been involved in inquiries of this kind, the people most affected have to be asked. They don't determine it, but they have to be asked and involved. Look what happened in child abuse inquiry. They ignored the survivors from the beginning, 4 different chairs, and we still haven't had very much evidence given. So it's a very simple involvement, both in terms of selecting a chair and in the terms of reference. Until we get that right, till we understand that this has to reflect the confidence of the community, these inquiries are not going to be worth the paper they're written on.
I wonder if we can then just return on that point to Ms Greenway. We began this interview by talking about the significance of the next home that they possess and that rehabilitation process. What's the significance of the correct questions being asked and answers provided in that process as well?
Well, you know, it's not so much about what, the right questions being asked. The problem that there is that people aren't listening to the answers. It's quite simple. People start to need to listen to these people. They're at the very heart of this. They know what they're feeling. They know what their immediate needs are. They know what their future needs are. They are saying this, but nobody's listening. Or if they are, they're not acting upon it. So, unless you're going to take their information and do something constructive with it, stop putting them through more agony. It's pointless.
So, from those that you have spoken to, Ms Greenway, what are those key issues that they need to have answered, not just satisfactorily, but in great depth?
Yeah, in great depth. Well, I mean, the thing is, they need to have information coming through, accurate information. There's a little information coming from the council, from what I understand, even less from the government. So, it's being left to, everything is community-led. If it wasn't for that community coming together the way they have done, I dread to think what would be happening to a lot of these people, because there's no authority there at all. So it's important that people get right into the heart of the community, and ask the right questions. What do you need? And it really saddens me and annoys me that mental health, which is a huge part of this, not just then, not just now, but way into the future, is basically being ignored. We're actually doing an SOS event. We're doing it in conjunction with the Justice for Grenfell campaigning group and also the Grenfell Volunteer Support and Information Network group. We're doing one within the immediate future. We're keeping all of that quiet because it has to be for the people in and around Grenfell. It's for them entirely, and we need their privacy to be respected, because they are so fed up with, wrong information coming to them, the media coming to them. They really do need to be left alone for a bit to try and deal with this trauma and start adapting to the grieving process.
I imagine that there'll be any number of residents of Grenfell hoping that the government has been listening to both of you. Yvette Greenway, Michael Mansfield, many thanks for joining us on Sky News.
Now, just days after calls for him to step down, the chairman of the Grenfell Tower Public Inquiry has promised to listen to the concerns of local people. It comes as the government says it will send a task force to run key areas of Kensington and Chelsea, following criticism of the council. Police today have given their latest update on the search for the dead and missing, as our special correspondent Lucy Manning reports.
The missing posters have been here for 3 weeks. They flutter, a painful reminder, because time has not brought any answers. Now the police search through the 15 tons of debris on each floor, still trying to find all the Grenfell victims. Karim Massawi was at the meeting the police and coroner called last night. His uncle, Hisham Rahman, is missing from the 23rd floor.
He went over to comfort, some young children, which for me is very heroic. I want that to stick and stay with the family. We may never know if my uncle is ever going to be found. The family's just broken, and there's no way of fixing them. This is something that can never be fixed, and they want to be able to bury their loved ones, pray for their loved ones, say goodbye in any way, shape or form. And it sounds like, all we're going to have is debris from his flat, which just isn't good enough. So. Yeah.
The police now say they have recovered all the remains from the building that were visible, and 87 recoveries, as they put it, have been made. But they stress because of the catastrophic damage, that doesn't mean 87 people, and they still can't say how many have died. Meanwhile, survivors struggle carrying bags of donated food back to their hotels. 3 weeks and you will have housing was the promise. This survivor didn't want to be identified, scared of being seen to criticise the council.
I didn't take them up on the offer. They were very expensive, the rent, and although they have promised that they were going to pay for a whole year, I didn't have to pay for a year. But after that, I said, put it in writing, and they said that the legal documents are not ready yet.
People would prefer to stay in their emergency temporary accommodation within hotels and make one move into permanent accommodation. So there have only actually been 14 acceptances so far.
So you would like to move the children away from here?
Yes. With residents feeling scared and let down, the government has now sent in an external task force to run some parts of the council, including housing. The minister overcome.
Hearing the harrowing accounts of survivors has been the most humbling and moving experience of my life. The families that I've met have been through unimaginable pain.
Today at the inquest, 60-year-old Vincent Chagina was named, and 84-year-old Sheila Smith described as a truly beautiful person. Lucy Manning, BBC News, West London.
It became the focus of anger and for many a symbol of failure. Today, Kensington and Chelsea Council found itself stripped of some of its core functions. A central government task force will now be responsible for housing and other council operations deemed to have fallen short in the aftermath of the Grenfell fire. The move comes on a day the government imposed a deadline to find temporary accommodation for all those made homeless by the fire, and when it expired. But so far, just 14 out of the 158 people affected, families affected, have accepted that the housing on offer. Our social affairs editor, Jackie Long, is in West London. Jackie.
Well, first about that housing deadline, I think when Theresa May first made that promise that within 3 weeks all people directly affected by the Grenfell fire would have good temporary accommodation, there was huge surprise. There has, however, been very little surprise at the fact that it has effectively failed. Yes, the offers have gone out, but as you say, very, very few people have taken them up on the offers, and I think that's part and parcel of the huge distrust and scepticism that is here. The new task force, we've spoken to Labour and Conservative councillors today who have welcomed that task force. Quite frankly, they're relieved. There is a huge challenge here, and it's now up to the task force to meet it. Floor after floor, the shell of Grenfell Tower stands testament to failures on so many fronts. Now the continuing inability of the council here to help its most desperate residents means a government-backed task force must take over some of its most basic functions. Corinne Jones escaped from the 17th floor with her 2 children and is now living in a hotel. She says the family was offered a flat in another borough 9 days ago and hasn't heard from them since.
I don't believe I should be placed out of the borough. Everything that my children have gone through, I don't think they need to be unsettled at the moment and also move again in a year's time.
Now you're aware of the voices that are coming out saying, you should just take this accommodation. What do you say to people who say that?
Unless you were actually in the situation, it's really, really, really hard to fully understand what we're going through. We're normal human beings who are just, you know, working, living, raising our kids. That has completely stopped in the sense of we have to now try and contact the council because they're not contacting us to find out where we're at, where we're going to be staying. They're still not clear. There's no transparency.
Corinne is a paediatric receptionist and her husband an IT specialist. But right now, trying to cope day to day is taking all their time.
I'm just having to just stay strong for my family, you know, just stay strong and just be stable for my kids, you know, so they're not in the normal routine, what they are used to. And we love routine, me and the children, we love routine.
139 households from in and around the tower have now been offered accommodation, according to the Grenfell response team. Just 14 households have accepted. The response team say all the properties are good quality accommodation and the vast majority are here in the borough. Yet the vast majority of residents are still saying no. Many are hugely unhappy about the way this process is working, with some arguing that offers being made at the moment are merely to meet today's arbitrary deadline thrown out by the Prime Minister and mean nothing in terms of securing them good permanent homes.
We need to respect that.
Today, the Housing Minister, struggling to compose himself, promised he understood and would tackle the lack of trust.
Mr. Speaker, on my visit to the Westway, hearing the harrowing accounts of survivors has been the most humbling and moving experience of my life. The families that I've met have been through unimaginable pain. This is a tragedy that should never have happened. And we are determined to do all that we can to make sure something like this never happens again.
From the local council now, there's an acceptance that they couldn't cope and now need to do much more to deal with the huge social housing crisis in its midst. What is your response to the fact that the government have now decided that outside bodies will come in and effectively run housing and other elements of the council's function?
My immediate response is thank God, and about time too. Kensington Council is very, very wealthy and has got £200 to £300 million in its reserves. Now is the time to spend it.
For Corinne Jones, there's nothing complicated about what her family needs, and soon.
Just something like what we had before, you know, we're not looking for glitz and glamour or luxury accommodation. We just want to have the space. We want it to be a permanent accommodation because that's where we were before.
The supposed deadline has come and gone. Perhaps the biggest challenge facing the new task force will be to convince residents and survivors the new homes they're being offered are places they'd really like to live. There's been an interesting development today. We already know that there is distrust of the public inquiry that has been set up, some unhappiness at the man who has been chosen to head up that inquiry, Sir Martin Morbeck. There is interesting development today because we understand that 2 members of his inquiry team have been on the ground here trying to talk to residents, going to some of the relief centres that have been set up in the wake of the Grenfell fire, telling residents, telling local groups that there is an 8-day deadline beginning today for written submissions from people to his inquiry. A huge rush, a very, very difficult deadline for traumatised residents to meet. We understand that the deadline has been set because he's keen to get started work before parliamentary recess, but I suspect it is a development that will go down very badly with many of the survivors and residents here.
Jackie Long. Now, I'm joined by the Conservative MP, Kevin Hollinrake, who sat on the Communities and Local Government Select Committee, and Joe Delaney from the Grenfell Action Group, which represents the residents of Grenfell Tower and the wider Lancaster West Estate, and also from Westminster by the Shadow Housing Minister, Melanie Onn. Let me start with you, Joe Delaney. What comfort do you derive from the fact that Kensington and Chelsea have been taken out of any control of the tower, and that a task force has been put in to run things?
I think it's too little too late, and also I think if they were going to go down this road, why not go the whole hog and assign a commissioner as opposed to this half measure? We're sick of half measures. Half measures are what meant that people slept rough for the first few nights because they couldn't get housing.
Is it a powerful enough body to actually do the job?
Well, this aren't half measures for Grenfell. A commissioner would take over the whole of the council. This is taking over the key elements of the council in terms of providing financial support, but crucially rehousing, which is the biggest issue we've got today. And I think the other issue we need to get right is the emotional support to rebuild that trust that clearly has been lost.
The special measures that Doncaster Council, for example, was subjected to, why hasn't Kensington and Chelsea been subjected to special?
Because it's conservative, plain and simple.
I don't think that's right. I think this is effectively special measures in this particular area for Grenfell. I think this task force will take over all the key responsibilities from the council. This has been welcomed by the leader of the council as well as by other councillors. It's the right thing to do. This is a national tragedy. It needs a national response.
It does seem, though, quite extraordinary that the council is really allowed to run anything at the moment, given the hash it's made of this tower.
Precisely. Well, I don't think they're running anything in terms of Grenfell now. This is national.
But they're running other services.
But they're running other services. They're running social services at the moment. They're running education. You know, how can we accept the Audit Commission's judgments on those services when blatantly that the score that they were given, outstanding for housing, was clearly absolute nonsense?
Well, the school is rated by Ofsted, not by the council itself.
No, the education department of the council. When it was audited, it was rated outstanding, along with the rest. Kensington and Chelsea supposedly a flagship council. You know, what flagship? The Titanic.
Well, let me bring in Melanie on. Melanie, can you just tell us what you make of the developments today? Do they come up to what Labour is demanding?
Well, we have seen not only the local authority in this case failing, but the government failing and being far too slow to act. And the appointment of this task force today is another example of the government being too slow to act. It was perfectly clear from the outset that the local authority was not equipped to deal with the scale of the incident as it unfolded. And the appointment of this task force, I find it quite disappointing that these are advisors, these are not commissioners, as has just been said, and actually they don't have any power to take action. And I think that what the residents are looking for now is a group of people who can take action, who can be decisive and who can deliver for them.
Well, I wonder, Kevin, can you reassure them that at least you will question ministers as to whether this task force does have the power we think it has?
Absolutely. We need to cut through all this today. Joe was talking earlier about the need for local residents to have to fill in complex housing applications. All that bureaucracy should be swept aside now. Let's get the money into the accounts of these people who have suffered this terrible tragedy. Let's get them rehoused properly and give them the proper emotional support that they need.
But why is it taking so long? We are 3 weeks in and we're still asking the same questions that we were asking 2 weeks ago.
One of the difficulties I think everybody is feeling down on the estate, there's no question, is that it has taken a very long time. 3 weeks to resolve the reality that everybody knew on day one. But there are actually the council wouldn't be able to.
Yes, there are complications and there are issues you don't even understand. You know, why don't you send someone to help my neighbour, Paul Dillon, who's lost his job today as a crane operator because he's taken so much time off from the tragedy, who was there as the building burned and offered translation services that night. You know, the council were wholly unable to deal with this. The council have got money, they've got credit cards, they've got phones. All people needed in the first instance was a hotel. And even that couldn't be arranged.
Well, let me ask you something, Joe Delaney, because in fact the residents have been organising themselves. To what extent are you actually able to ameliorate any difficulties that you are encountering?
The group at the moment who's been offering the most support is a group called the Real Community, John. It's an umbrella group of all the local voluntary organisations, and they are now a well-oiled machine. No, they were not perfect from the outset. No one expected them to be. You know, this was unprecedented, as people keep saying. But my God, they tried, and my God, they improved, and my God, they listened.
But as we stand now, are you prepared to give the task force a chance? And maybe if you can view what you think goes wrong on a daily basis, if it does, you could inform Kevin and other MPs, and Melanie on too, as to what needs to be improved.
We've informed.
I mean, if everybody is going to be fighting all the way through this, we're never going to get anywhere.
No, we're not going to get anywhere. But look, they should work with people who have trust. Give money to groups like the Real Community. Let them handle things. Let them be the liaison between the authorities and the residents. Because, frankly, the council aren't going to regain trust. They haven't earned it. They don't deserve it.
Kevin.
Yes, I quite understand. You know, I've been down to Grenfell. I've been into the houses of people who have been affected by this tragedy. I understand the anger, the lack of trust in terms of what has happened that's positive. Of the £5 million set aside, £2.5 million of that has been distributed. Offers of accommodation have been made.
Wholly inadequate offers of accommodation.
Absolutely
You're
right.
offering families that were already in overcrowded houses smaller properties.
And I quite understand that. And I think it's absolutely right that we consult the residents. We make sure they get appropriate offers of accommodation. Nobody's compelled to accept any of these offers, and if people want to stay in hotel accommodation rather than a temporary move, then another move to permanent accommodation, I quite understand that. But the biggest issue, I think, is this emotional support about the tragedies, about loved ones whose bodies have not been recovered, making sure that people have got proper support from an individual, not just from a body. I think that will help to rebuild this trust.
Melanie, what this discussion itself has illustrated is that there's tremendous mistrust between the residents and politicians. What can be done now to try and build trust? To what extent are you prepared to work with the government to try to resolve this? It really isn't one for, let's do the fighting later. Now it's got surely to be together to sort this out.
Well, I think there do have to be some very serious practical solutions put forward, and I think that, you know, we are doing our job in terms of highlighting the issues that residents are bringing to us that the government so far has not been prepared to accept. But when it comes to the practicalities of supporting those individuals, the Minister asked us today if we're aware of particular sets of circumstances of difficulties being encountered by individuals with the quality of property that is being offered to them, to raise that with the Minister, and we're perfectly prepared to do that. But there are still some really serious questions that why, after 3 weeks and promises made by the Prime Minister that people would be offered suitable accommodation within 3 weeks, the deadline being today, that only 3 families have actually moved into those properties. There is clearly a systemic problem with the quality and suitability of properties that are being offered, and that needs to be addressed very quickly.
Joe Delaney, I mean, what are you prepared to?
I mean, it's true. A lot of people were already in overcrowded properties in Grenfell Tower, so they're being told, well, you only had a 2-bedroom property there, or we're offering you as a 2-bedroom, or here, you can have another one at the top of another tower block. Most of those people don't even want to look at another tower block, let alone live in one. But you see, now the Conservatives can say, oh, well, we've made offers. And already you can see in the Conservative media that they're trying to change the narrative now. People should be grateful that they've had an offer, and they should have accepted it.
But I think you would accept that there's been a step change today. The Council have stepped down, the government has stepped in. That's a start, isn't it?
Well, we've just agreed that we don't know. You know, how much power does this advisory body have?
Well, we will watch and report over the next few days. Kevin has said he's going to keep an eye on it as well.
I hope so. I would love to be proven wrong
for
once in this entire affair. I would love to be proven wrong.
Let's hope. But thank you very much,
Joe
Delaney, and thank you very much indeed, Kevin, and indeed, Melanie. Thank you.